Hello and welcome to the first edition of the Vermont Report on Palestine-Israel. I'm Mark Hage. This program will feature investigative journalism, documentaries, interviews, and current news on the unfolding genocide in Gaza and the relentless violence, ethnic cleansing, and repression by Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. My intention is to offer you insights, perspectives, facts that you are not going to receive from the mainstream corporate press, but that are essential to understanding what is happening today in Gaza and across occupied Palestine. My first report is a compilation of stories from The Listening Post, a program broadcast weekly by Al Jazeera. Its mission is to investigate and deconstruct how the world's media operates and the stories they cover or refuse to cover. This particular episode aired in early March and reported on the growing scandal around a story published by the New York Times in December. It was titled "Screams Without Words," and it accused Palestinian fighters on October 7th of carrying out a systematic campaign of rape and sexual assault. The story, however, began to fall apart not long afterwards, generating an internal rift within the Times and calling into question yet again the credibility of the Times when it comes to its coverage of Israel and occupied Palestine.
We're almost 5 months into Israel's war on Gaza, and among the institutions whose reputations have taken a beating over their coverage, the New York Times. A German film festival worthy of its own award for the worst performance in tacit support of an Israeli genocide. And why bother investigating war crimes in Gaza when Israeli soldiers are documenting those crimes and incriminating themselves? Since Israel launched its assault on Gaza in October, many Western news outlets have seen their credibility take a hit, accused by audiences and staff members alike of succumbing to Israeli propaganda. That includes one of the world's best-known publications, the New York Times. A notorious case in point, an investigation the Times published back in December, which alleged that Hamas deliberately weaponized rape and sexual violence on October 7th. Those claims have since been unsubstantiated, if not disproven, revealing the Times' pro-Israeli, anti-Palestinian bias and leaving the paper's newsroom riven by dissent. But for the Times' critics, including some of its former reporters, the article is a mere symptom of an age-old problem, a persistent double standard in the stories the paper deems fit to print on Israel and Palestine, and those it does not.
The role of the New York Times is not defined by its circulation. It's defined by the fact that it sets the agenda. That's number one. Number two, most newspapers do not have foreign bureaus, and so they will run the Times' foreign coverage. So that's the power of the Times. It sets the agenda.
Starting with something that is definitely not breaking news, the American newspaper of record, the New York Times, has a track record of supporting Israel. What is new are the stakes. Israel is on trial for genocide at the International Court of Justice. Core to its propaganda effort has been framing Hamas's attacks on October 7th as extraordinarily sadistic, like something out of the ISIS playbook.
The wholesale massacre, mutilation, rape, and abduction of as many citizens as the terrorists could find.
Enter the Times and this story, published in late December. It accused Palestinian militants of weaponizing rape and sexual violence, systematically unleashing it on Israeli women and men. A lurid allegation, a sensational story, but one that the evidence simply fails to support.
When the New York Times said, we've done a 2-month-long investigation, we interviewed 150 people, and we found a broad pattern of sexual violence on October 7th. That, for a lot of people, just closed the case. If the New York Times is saying it, then it must be true. I even had friends who know how much Israel misrepresents things and lies, who said, Ali, now, surely you have to give some credence to what it's saying. But it's a case of journalistic fraud because it just doesn't deliver the goods.
The principal criticism lies within the main claim, which is that not only did sexual assault and occasions of rape occur, but that they were used systematically. Since that report has been published, major flaws have emerged, not just in the contents itself, but also when it comes to the actual journalists and authors behind the report.
Alternative U.S. news outlets, subscriber-funded ones like Mondovice, Electronic Intifada, and The Gray Zone went to work debunking the Times' story. They noted the article contained zero direct testimony from victims, that the alleged eyewitnesses the paper quoted were either anonymous or of dubious credibility, that the family of a woman killed on October 7th disputed the Times' assertion that she had been raped. Another of the Times' sources accused the reporters of pressuring them to speak, saying it was important for Israel's PR effort. One of the reporters involved, Anat Schwartz, had never filed a news story before October 7th. She is a filmmaker whose Wikipedia page said she had worked for Israeli intelligence. Had the Times done its homework, its editors would have known that Schwartz's social media accounts revealed she had liked some disturbing posts, including one advocating turning Gaza into a slaughterhouse, a post South Africa included in its case against Israel at the ICJ. Not that the story was Schwartz's idea, as she explained to Israeli Army radio.
הניו יורק טיימס אמר בוא נעשה תחקיר על אלימות מינית. זה היה יותר לשכנע אותי מאשר הם אמרו מההתחלה.
זו הצעה של הניו יורק טיימס כל המחקר, כל התחקיר הזה?
חד משמעית.
It was an odd way for such a report to come together. Still, the Times published it and showcased it.
Imagine it was the other way around. Any Palestinian who whispers something that is considered politically incorrect is out in a second. And yet you have this person who worked for the Israeli intelligence, who wasn't a journalist, and who liked on social media these blood-curdling calls for the decimation of Palestinians in Gaza. And that's the person you hire to report on your story. Disparity between standards is staggering.
The New York Times article had an enormous impact. I've seen it cited repeatedly, even by some human rights organizations. But I have to say, I think that it had less influence than it might have had if independent media outlets had not exposed the flaws in it. The New York Times is used to getting away with this, and this time they didn't.
Critics of that Times report included people on the inside. The paper's podcast, The Daily, planned to produce a version of the story, but dropped the project following dissent in the newsroom over concerns about the journalism. Roughly 6 weeks later, when UN officials highlighted quote-unquote credible allegations that Israelis had raped or sexually assaulted Palestinians they have imprisoned, including children, the Times failed to cover the story. Then there is the writing the paper has published by Thomas Friedman, a former Jerusalem bureau chief turned columnist. Friedman infamously backed the 2003 US-led invasion of Iraq that was based on lies, and did so in the most offensive, cavalier way.
And what they needed to see was American boys and girls going house to house from Basra to Baghdad and basically saying, well, suck on this, okay?
This time around, Friedman concocted a column comparing the Middle East to an animal kingdom, with America cast as an old lion, Iranians as wasps, and Hamas as some kind of spider.
When he likens the Palestinians and various other players in the region to animals, it's horrifyingly offensive at a time when the Israelis are saying that the Palestinians in Gaza are human animals. And even more offensive than that is treating a situation like this as some kind of fable or barnyard story, rather than actually understanding the reality of the Palestinians, that this is an oppressed people, this is an occupied people.
It's classic colonialism, classic racism, and wherever you look in a settler colonial project, the British in Kenya or India, they spoke in the same language and they used overwhelming force to subdue a population that they considered less than human and only capable of understanding violence. Friedman in the Iraq War was the famous one who said,
"We hit Iraq because we could."
Thomas Friedman is one of the spokespeople for that twisted ideology, and that's why he does as well as he does.
The New York Times is not alone in failing its American audience on the Gaza story. There was the Wall Street Journal report on Israel's allegation that UNRWA, the relief agency so many Palestinians depend on, had been infiltrated by Hamas. The paper swallowed Israel's unsubstantiated side of that story, hook, line, and sinker. There's CNN and the fake news beheaded babies narrative.
Babies and toddlers were found with their heads decapitated.
Neither CNN nor the Journal, however, are considered America's news outlet of record, the way the Times is. But should it be? Despite some worthwhile investigations since October 7th, like this one showing the destruction caused by 2,000-pound Israeli bombs, that does not begin to address an imbalance that goes back decades. The unmistakable pro-Israel bias coming out of the Times' Jerusalem bureau, where Chris Hedges worked in the early 2000s.
You have had more than one case where the reporter assigned to Jerusalem, Ethan Bronner, for example, his children are serving in the IDF. I mean, imagine that. If a Palestinian reporter covering Gaza, his kids were in an armed wing of any Palestinian faction. So I, sick of the one-sided coverage, used vacation time to go to Hana Yunis and write a magazine piece for Harper's called A Gaza Diary. That was published, and I was informed that I would never report again from the Middle East for the New York Times. I'm an Arabic speaker, by the way. They don't have a lot. So you pay a heavy price if you attempt to report.
We requested interviews with numerous reporters at the Times and a spokesperson there. All of them declined. Instead, the paper sent this statement: "We remain confident in the accuracy of our reporting and stand by the team's investigation, which was rigorously sourced and edited." We could have asked about the paper's famous motto, the one created in 1897 that still adorns its masthead today, and perhaps suggested an edit. Something like, all the news that's fit to print, and some that clearly isn't. Germany is under a long shadow of censorship when it comes to Gaza, a situation that is so grim it can be comedic at times. The latest example came at a film festival in Berlin where an Israeli and a Palestinian teamed up to win an award. Meenakshi Ravi is here with more.
The Berlinale is one of the so-called Big Five film festivals worldwide and is a major cultural institution in Germany. It was already facing criticism for its silence on the genocide in Gaza. Several filmmakers pulled out in protest, and festival workers demanded the organizers call for a ceasefire. It all came to a head when No Other Land, a film about the ethnic cleansing and settling of Palestinian villages in the West Bank, won the award for Best Documentary. The film was co-directed by Palestinian activist Basel Adra and Israeli filmmaker Yuval Abraham.
I am Israeli, Basel is Palestinian, and in 2 days we will go back to a land where we are not equal. I am living under a civilian law and Basel is under military law. This situation of apartheid between us, this inequality, it has to end.
The festival quickly distanced itself from Abraham's remarks, which were hardly controversial. The German press and politicians criticized Abraham, a Jewish Israeli, calling his statement anti-Semitic. Berlin's mayor said the words were intolerable. The country's culture minister, who was criticized for applauding the filmmakers, then clarified she was clapping only for Abraham. All in all, a ridiculous example of the toxic climate in Germany for any discussion about the war in Gaza. A Berlin-based coalition of arts and culture workers called it an ever-present atmosphere of fear, self-censorship and suspicion on social media and in the workplace, in institutions and on the street. Israeli media went all in on the story as well. Threats against the makers of No Other Land have intensified, and Yuval Abraham, who says his family in Israel has been targeted by right-wing mobs, says he's now too afraid to go back home.
Thanks, Mina. After Hamas's attacks on October 7th, Israeli leaders spoke openly about the annihilation of Gaza. They said there were no innocents there, called Palestinians animals with no right to exist. They were inciting a genocide. A message that was clearly heard on the battlefield because in one video after another, Israeli soldiers have recorded their own war crimes, celebrating as they looted homes, destroyed houses, or set them on fire, filming as they mocked, humiliated, and assaulted Palestinian captives. It is a sign of the impunity they think they have that so much of that material has been brazenly posted on social media. Now, in a way, Palestinians have seen this kind of thing before, going back to 1948. But never have the images, the videos, been this widespread, explicit, and barbaric. The Listening Post has collected some of that material and asked 3 experts on human rights and torture to assess it. First, a viewer warning. Many of the images in this report are difficult to take in.
There has been a remarkable number of videos posted by Israeli soldiers on social media depicting themselves pillaging property, mocking the death and destruction that they are causing, and most egregiously torturing, humiliating, and mocking detained Palestinian prisoners.
The images of mass arrests, of torture of Palestinians, of numbering their bodies, which is reminiscent of images all of us have seen from Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib. These images are testament to what Palestinians have long been saying, which is that this settler colonial regime is utterly violent. They show the nature through which this genocide is unfolding in the Gaza Strip. They also show the extreme brutality and torture, violence, utter disregard of human life, transforming these violent conducts into a spectacle to be viewed and watched on social media posts.
They lack specific intelligence about who actually might be Hamas, and because they lack intelligence, they therefore are rounding up everyone in order to hope to extract information through interrogation. The fact that they've been stripped to their underwear is, a manifestation of cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment, which is also illegal in addition to torture. The fact that they're photographing these things, it's like trophy shots. What this depicts, I think, very vividly is dehumanization and torture. The idea that somebody can be just like their body is just being attacked, in their most vulnerable position. His hands are bound behind his back. He's lying face down, soldiers stepping on his face. In a sense, it epitomizes torture in general, purposefully harming someone who's in custody. That custodial relationship is a particularly vulnerable one where, the custodians have all the power and the prisoner, who is in this case not only on the ground and tied up, but completely powerless.
The images are showing us and telling us how central imprisonment or carceral practices are to this settler colonial regime. The torture, humiliation, and degrading conduct against Palestinians is not simply restricted to the Gaza Strip. There are also images and videos that have been circulating from the West Bank. Since October 7th, over 7,000 Palestinians have been detained, which is a number unheard of over the past decade.
Israeli soldiers have quite remarkably taken to converting their massive, really unprecedented destruction of Palestinian homes, hospitals, mosques, universities, churches, schools, into entertainment videos. There's one video where Israeli soldiers are showing some residential homes that they've set on fire and attached a song.
This house is on fire.
There have been many, many images of Israeli soldiers who've ransacked Palestinian homes and confiscated their personal goods. One in particular is the red negligee that appears to be seen in so many Israeli videos where Israeli soldiers are mocking and advertising their very deliberate intrusion of the home of a Palestinian woman, the confiscation of her most intimate apparel, and flaunting that in a way that's definitely intended to be provocative and humiliating.
The videos further reinforce a discourse that is coming out of every sector of the Israeli official machinery, where all Palestinians are the enemy. Many officials have said they deserve to be eliminated. And you see it manifested in that kind of joie de vivre, that soldiers are expressing as they destroy Palestinian homes. And there is a consumption of this kind of image that kind of fortifies the anger, the hatred, the anti-Palestinian sentiment, and the kind of complete disregard of the humanity of Palestinian civilians.
There's such a high level of confidence among these IDF soldiers that they can do whatever they want. To say to the whole world, look at what we're doing to Palestinians in Gaza, look at how we are brutalizing detainees, look at how we're humiliating every single man, woman, and child as we destroy their homes, set fire to them, and make fun of it. And they are provoking and challenging the whole world. To say, we can do this, we can get away with it, and no one in the world can stop us. No Israeli has found themselves sanctioned by the international community, by countries that have these tools, which again has only reinforced the belief of Israeli soldiers that they are immune, that they are exempted from complying with international laws, from basic human rights laws, that they are above the law.
Since the beginning of this genocidal war, reservists have been called up. And who are the reservists? They are the entire proportion of the Israeli society. There are teachers, professors, students, doctors, medics, artists, writers, journalists. These images, they are not only directed to a small audience, they are directed to a broad audience. There's a long practiced history of racializing and dehumanizing Palestinians. These images and these videos entirely show how Israeli violence is also not only directed towards Palestinian livelihood, but also their material being, so their houses, their belongings, eliminating Palestinian existence. History has taught us that the dehumanization of subjects is essential to the infliction of violence. I think Israel has perfected this in discourse and in practice, but this is not new. It dates back to the beginning of this state, through which Palestinians were expelled, degraded, humiliated, killed, and effectively, forcibly disappeared.
And finally, this past week, more than 50 international broadcast journalists signed a letter calling for free and unfettered access to Gaza. The letter was addressed to the states responsible for cutting off the Strip from the outside world, Israel and Egypt. Since October 7th, only a few foreign reporters have made it into Gaza, mostly those embedded with the Israeli military, and they were not allowed to speak with Palestinians, which left us to rely on the courageous work of local journalists, an unprecedented number of whom have paid with their lives. It is long past time that Israel and Egypt let journalists in. The awful scenes this past week in Gaza City, the Israeli military's massacre of more than 100 Palestinians who were lining up for food, simply underlines how important that journalistic access can be. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
This episode also looks at the outrage in Germany caused by the acceptance speech of Yuval Abraham, an Israeli Jew, at this year's Berlin Film Festival. His film, No Other Land, about the ethnic cleansing of Palestine by Jewish settlers, co-directed with Basil Adra, a Palestinian activist, won top prize for Best Documentary. And finally, the second half of the program exposes in graphic detail, with social and political commentary, the horrific and systematic crimes against humanity committed by Israeli soldiers in the Gaza Strip, and their use of social media to brazenly post and disseminate these videos about the crimes they are committing. What is very apparent is that these soldiers believe that they can do virtually anything they want with absolute impunity. Here now is the March 2nd edition of Al Jazeera's The Listening Post.
I've been campaigning for Palestine for 51 years. When you find out that your life was built on the destruction of other people, you have responsibility. So for me it was always the determining factor in everything I did in my life.
But can I do tea? I need to drink.
Can I come with you?
So nobody is having tea, coffee.
I'll join you for tea. I'll join you for tea definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sugar?
Yes, please. That'd be great.
My name is Yael Khan. I was born in Nahariya, but when I was 2 years old, my family moved to the south. It's a place called Kfar Mordechai. As a child, I had a few memories which bothered me. Of course, Israel was always apartheid, so in a nursery or in elementary school or high school, there was no a single Palestinian. It was like you didn't have the tool even to question. It was like There was a desert, and we made the desert bloom. And we're going to the, oh, I've got my sign, just one sec. We're going to the demonstration. To my shame, I did go to the army. I was still unaware of the Palestinians, as if like you have army in a vacuum. And so I was in the Air Force, and that's where I encountered most outright classes and racism. Ironically, you were top of the pile if your parents were from Germany, as long as they were not in the concentration camps.
Most people show their support when they see the Palestinian flag. You can see the smile it gives people when they see the Palestinian flag. I can feel that the next train is coming. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Are you going to the demo? It's especially lovely seeing the children coming to the demo. Thank you so much for bringing the children, especially because of what Israel does to children in Gaza. Free, 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 from the river to the sea, from the river to the sea. Free, 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 free. I like your flag.
Massive.
That's high up.
I ordered it by mistake.
Oh, by mistake!
I looked at it, went on Google, the first one I seen, I bought it. Then I had to buy a stick big enough.
When I became anti-Zionist in 1971, 72, 51 years ago, my father's first reaction was calling me terrorist. And so for some years we just had the shouting match. I was all the time telling my dad that Israel is not satisfied with the 67 occupation and not with the Nakba, but it also wants to occupy Lebanon. And he dismissed it, no way. So when in 82 Israel invaded Lebanon, clearly with a view to occupy Lebanon. So that was a massive shift in my father. And after that, he became my biggest supporter. In the 80s, he was saying that how he suffered from anti-Semitism as a child in Nazi Germany was nothing as the racism that Israelis have against Palestinians. Occupation no more. Israel a terrorist state. Occupation no more. To hurt?
We don't need to hurt.
I'm hurting because Gaza is being exterminated.
We are all hurting, you're right.
Stop the Holocaust in Gaza. Stop the Israeli extermination of Gaza. every year that I am in the UK, the support for Palestine increased massively. I think people started to wake up. People were so shocked of the Israeli brutality. For me, I always knew that this is what Israel is about.
I'm always amazed by people that are not Palestinian. What's the drive?
Well, I lived on the land stolen from them, so I have no excuse.
That's amazing.
That is totally my obligation.
You see
More
it?
than anybody else.
I'm so lucky. I've never been. Maybe one day.
Where is you originally from?
We're from Accra.
Yeah. I hope you will see Accra. It's a beautiful city. It's very beautiful. I'm so sorry.
It was very nice meeting you.
For me, the only solution, and it's obvious, that Palestinians have to come back from where they were ethnic cleansed. Palestinians have to come back. They have to come back to Jaffa, they have to come back to Haifa, they have to come back to Acre. All of the cities from where they were ethnic cleansed, whether it is the Palestinian in Gaza or if it's a Palestinian in the West Bank or the Palestinians scattered around the world. There have to be the end of the Israeli apartheid. Israel always been apartheid. Since I was a child, it was always apartheid. They underestimated the power of people, and the people were not fooled. They tried to stop us showing support for the Palestinians. They told us we can't have the Palestinian flag. They told us we can't say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And we say all up and loud, and look at that, all thousands and thousands of Palestinian flags all around, and we all shouting in support of Gaza.
In an unprecedented first, on January 11th, South Africa took Israel to the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, for violating the Genocide Convention in its war on Gaza. On January 26th, the court determined that South Africa had indeed demonstrated that it is plausible that Israel has committed acts of genocide and violated the Genocide Convention. The court, to be clear, did not make a final determination on whether Israel is guilty of genocide. Judicial deliberations on that matter will come at a later date. But the court did order 6 provisional measures against Israel to protect Gaza's population from the further risk of genocide. In later programs, we'll explore in more depth this historic case and additional hearings before the ICJ requested by South Africa. For now, though, we'll start with a video tutorial on both the case and the Genocide Convention. It was produced by the online news portal Middle East Eye, just prior to the International Court of Justice convening in January to hear South Africa's case. We turn now to the inspirational and dogged activism of Yael Khan, a Jewish woman born and raised in Israel. For 51 years, She has been campaigning to end Israel's brutal military occupation and illegal settlement regime, and to expose and dismantle its system of apartheid domination over all Palestinians living between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. She is again marching in the streets, this time in Great Britain, protesting for an end to the genocidal war in Gaza and for a just peace in Israel-Palestine. This report also comes to us courtesy of Middle East Eye.
In December, South Africa became the first country to file a case against Israel at the International Court of Justice, or ICJ, alleging genocide against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, where almost half of the population are children. Nearly 23,000 Palestinians have been killed since Israel began its military assault on Gaza after October 7th, the vast majority of them children and women. That's enough people to exceed the 20,000 capacity of the O2 Arena in London.
Gaza has become a graveyard for children.
In an 84-page document, South Africa has gone into exhaustive detail, outlining the precise ways in which it believes Israel has violated the Genocide Convention. Immediately, South Africa frames its case against Israel in the context of apartheid, an institutionalized regime of oppression and domination by one racial group over another, according to a definition by Amnesty International. The atrocities committed on and since October 7th were preceded by Israel's 75-year-long apartheid, its 56-year-long belligerent occupation of Palestinian territory, and its 16-year-long blockade of Gaza, the report says. Before a hearing of the case scheduled this week on January 11th and 12th, here are some of the key takeaways from the document. What is the Genocide Convention? On December 9, 1948, 3 years after the end of the Second World War, the United Nations approved a written international agreement known as the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, also known as the Genocide Convention. For the first time, genocide was now an international crime. As of April 2022, 153 states, including Palestine, South Africa, and Israel, have ratified the Genocide Convention. This means signatories are obliged to prevent and to punish the crime of genocide, including by enacting relevant legislation and punishing perpetrators. But what do we mean when we talk about genocide? According to the UN, genocide is defined as acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial or religious group. In the last century alone, there have been numerous genocides. Referred to as the first of the 20th century, there was the Armenian genocide. Then there was the Holocaust. Then there was the Rwandan genocide, followed by the Bosnian genocide. More recently, in 2014, ISIS committed genocide of the Yazidis, a religious minority group from Iraq, and China has been accused of the genocide of Uyghurs, the largest minority ethnic group in the northwestern province of Xinjiang. Since the start of the Ukraine war in 2022, Ukraine has also taken Russia to the ICJ for crimes of genocide. The term genocide was coined by Raphael Lemkin, a Polish Jewish lawyer whose parents were among 49 family members murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust. Combining the Greek word for race or tribe, geno, with the Latin word for killing, side, Lemkin created one word to describe the Nazis' systematic murder of European Jews. Lemkin made a simple but profound argument that small countries who could not protect themselves against the force of larger countries who had arms at their disposal should be protected through international law. Now, Israel, a nation created on occupied land as a sanctuary for Jews who have historically faced anti-Semitism, pogroms and genocide for centuries, faces allegations of genocide. South Africa has meticulously documented 29 damning pages of factual and legally reinforced evidence of genocidal acts committed by Israel against the Palestinian people, which violate 4 categories of Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. The October 7th war, like all conflicts between Israel and Palestine, has been characterized as a war between equal powers, especially since Hamas killed around 1,200 Israelis, the majority of them civilians. But Israel's ongoing blockade of Gaza has meant that freedom of movement of people and goods has been entirely under Israeli control, igniting accusations of illegal collective punishment and Gaza being compared to an open-air prison. Established in June 1945, the International Court of Justice's job is to settle, in accordance with international law, legal disputes submitted to it by states and to give advisory opinions on legal questions referred to it by authorized UN groups and specialized agencies. The court is independent without political bias, and it is composed of 15 elected judges. Remember, the ICJ is different to the International Criminal Court, or ICC. Both the ICJ and the ICC are located in The Hague, a city in the Netherlands. But the ICJ deals with state-to-state complaints. The ICC deals with individual criminal responsibility. It's worth noting Israel doesn't recognize the ICC's authority. It does, however, recognize the International Court of Justice's rulings, which are final and cannot be appealed. But the court has no power to enforce them. South Africa's landmark case is not the first time Israel has been referred to the ICJ. In 2004, the International Court ruled Israel's separation wall in the occupied West Bank was illegal. The ICJ ruled parts of the wall already erected should be dismantled, construction must stop immediately, and Israel should make reparations for any damage caused. Israel rejected the ruling. In November 2022, a UN panel voted to request an opinion from the ICJ on the legal ramifications of Israel's prolonged occupation, settlement, and annexation of Palestinian territory since 1967. South Africa's report breaks down Israel's crimes of genocide into 8 different sections. 1. Killing Palestinians in Gaza. Israel has dropped unguided dumb bombs on Gaza and heavy bombs weighing up to 2,000 pounds, which have a predicted lethal radius of up to 360 meters. That's over 1,000 feet, more than twice the height of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has described the Israeli Defense Force as the most moral army in the world.
מי שמעז להאשים את חיילינו בפשעי מלחמה הם אנושים חדורי צביעות ושקר, שאין בהם אפילו טיפת מוסר אחת. צה"ל הוא הצבא המוסרי ביותר בעולם.
But as the report documents extensively, Palestinians have been killed by Israeli airstrikes in their homes, in hospitals, schools, churches, mosques, and shelters. The level of child mortality in Palestinian families has been so devastating that medics in Gaza have been forced to coin a new acronym.
You know, there's an acronym in the Gaza Strip right now. You know, I'm a pediatric intensive care doctor. I see a lot of suffering in my career. There's an acronym that is unique to the Gaza Strip, and it's WCNSF. Wounded child, no surviving family.
To add to the shocking number of deaths, over 311 doctors, nurses, and other healthcare workers, including doctors and ambulance drivers, were killed on duty. At least 105 journalists have been killed, the highest number in one conflict since the Committee to Protect Journalists began documenting journalist deaths. Two, causing serious bodily and mental harm to Palestinians. As well as pointing to the over 55,000 Palestinians who have been wounded, the majority of them women and children, the document also emphasizes how Palestinian children in Gaza suffered severe trauma before October 7th from previous attacks. 3. Mass expulsion from homes and displacement of Palestinians in Gaza. Over 1.9 million Palestinians out of Gaza's population of 2.3 million people, approximately 85% of the population, have been forced from their homes. Despite being rejected by the US, senior far-right Israeli politicians, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir have openly encouraged the voluntary emigration of Gaza's population to other countries. As South Africa points out, there is precedent for forced mass displacement being considered a genocidal act, as was seen in the ICJ case on the Bosnian genocide. Around 60% of the entire housing stock in Gaza has been damaged or destroyed. 4. Deprivation of access to adequate food and water. When Israel declared a complete siege on Gaza on October 9th, allowing no electricity, food, water and fuel to enter the Strip, UN officials have since warned famine is around the corner in Gaza. 4 out of 5 of the hungriest people anywhere in the world are in Gaza, the UN Secretary General said. Desperate for food, Palestinians are resorting to foraging, collecting spilled flour from aid distributions from the road. Some are even turning to hunting for cats. 5. Deprivation of access to adequate medical care. The healthcare system in Gaza has all but collapsed, with 14 hospitals out of 36 facilities now only partially functional at the time of the document's release. Among the countless tragic stories that have emerged was one about 5 babies whose decomposing remains were discovered in Al-Nasser Children's Hospital in northern Gaza after they were abandoned following frenzied forced evacuations by Israeli forces. 6. Deprivation of access to adequate shelter, clothes, hygiene, and sanitation. Most of the 1.9 million displaced Palestinians in Gaza are seeking shelter in United Nations Relief and Works Agency facilities, the majority of them schools and tents. Despite the fact Israel has been given the coordinates of all UN facilities, these shelters have been targeted by Israeli airstrikes, killing hundreds of Palestinian men, women, and children.
The people of Gaza are being told to move like human pinballs, ricocheting between ever smaller slivers of the south without any of the basics for survival. But nowhere in Gaza is safe.
7. The destruction of the life of the Palestinian people in Gaza. In reports like these, the dead become invisible, enveloped by the apathy of statistics. But in its report, South Africa names several of Gaza's local legends killed since October 7th, including pastry chef Masoud Mohammed Al-Qatati, known as Abu Shadi, whose reputation for giving kanafa to customers for free earned him the nickname of Father of the Poor. There's also 84-year-old Ilham Farah, an accordionist and music teacher known as Mother Orange to generations of Palestinian music students because of her vibrant red hair, who was shot dead by an Israeli sniper outside the Holy Family Church in Gaza City. Israel is not just destroying the official memory and records of Palestinians in Gaza through its destruction of Gaza's archives and historic landmarks, including the Great Omari Mosque and the 1,600-year-old Church of St. Porphyrius. It is obliterating Palestinian personal lives and private memories, histories and futures through bombing and bulldozing graveyards. 8. Israel is imposing measures intended to prevent Palestinian births. Almost 6,000 of approximately 52,000 pregnant Palestinian women in Gaza are giving birth each month in unsafe conditions, in shelters, in their homes, in the streets amid rubble, or in overwhelmed healthcare facilities, often with no clean water. Newborns are also dying from preventable diseases. Officially, Israel claims its aim in Gaza is to wipe Hamas off the face of the earth. But South Africa argues Israel's conduct against Palestinians in Gaza and its clear, repeated dehumanizing statements by Israeli government and military officials has demonstrated clear intent for genocide. It's a thorny legal issue trying to pinpoint special intent to commit genocide or dolus specialis. But South Africa provides 8 pages of examples of expressions of genocidal intent, starting with Benjamin Netanyahu himself. In a letter to Israeli soldiers and officers also published on X, formerly Twitter, on November 3rd, Netanyahu wrote, "This is the war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. We will not let up on our mission until the light overcomes the darkness. The good will defeat the extreme evil that threatens us and the entire world."
You must remember what Amalek has done to you, says our Holy Bible.
إسرائيل فرضت إغلاق كامل على غزة ومش راح يكون في عندكم كهرباء ولا مي، بس دمار. بدكم جهنم، راح תחסלו على جهنم.
תעלו והצליחו, תכסחו אותם כמה שיותר, שלא נשאיר מהם זכר. שלא הם, לא אמא שלהם, לא הילדה שלהם, לא התינוקות שלהם. אסור להם לחיות לחיות האלה.
מה צריך לעשות במלחמה הזאת? מחלקי הסוכריות. מחלקי הסוכריות, את אלה שתומכים, את אלה ששרים, גם אותם צריך לחסל.
This is then followed by 3 pages of quotes from UN experts who have repeatedly warned since at least mid-October that the Palestinian people are at grave risk of genocide by Israel. South Africa have extensively cross-referenced other high-profile genocide cases submitted to the ICJ. The court considers a civilian population to be extremely vulnerable, where the military operations have resulted in numerous civilian deaths and injuries and have caused significant material damages, including the destruction of buildings and infrastructure, and where attacks are ongoing and are creating increasingly difficult living conditions for the civilian population. It sounds exactly like what is happening in Gaza, but these are quotes from documents the Ukraine filed at the ICJ against Russia in February last year. A month later, after a fast-track procedure, the ICJ ordered provisional measures against Russia, which they rejected. Remember, more Palestinians have been killed in the space of 3 months than the number of Ukrainians killed since the start of the Ukraine versus Russia war in 2022. The systematic stripping of human rights, dehumanizing narratives and rhetoric, methodical planning, mass killing, mass displacement, mass fear, overwhelming levels of brutality, combined with the physical destruction of the home of the targeted population in every sense and on every level. These words sound as though they were written about Gaza. They're actually quotes from proceedings the West African nation of the Gambia initiated against Myanmar in 2019 against its deadly crackdown on Rohingya Muslims. The ICJ unanimously accepted the Gambia's request for provisional measures in December 2020 and issued a provisional order to Myanmar to end its genocidal acts. In fact, the governments of Canada, Denmark, France, Germany, and the Netherlands, and the UK signed a joint declaration of intervention on November 15th last year in support of Gambia's case. The UK have faced accusations of double standards after they suggested lowering the threshold for genocide to include serious bodily or mental harm of children in the intervention document for Myanmar, but resisted calling for a ceasefire early on, even as thousands of Palestinian children were killed in Israeli airstrikes. In page 81 of the document, South Africa calls on Israel to immediately suspend its military operations in and against Gaza. It also calls on Israel to take effective measures to prevent the destruction and ensure the preservation of evidence related to allegations of acts within the scope of Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. If the ICJ rules in favour of South Africa's case, they can only announce provisional measures. Benjamin Netanyahu slammed South Africa's allegations of genocide, calling it mendacious pontificating and hot air, lies and vanity. Israeli spokesperson Eilon Levy confirmed Israel will fight the case at the ICJ.
The State of Israel will appear before the International Court of Justice at The Hague to dispel South Africa's absurd blood libel.
International law experts say the proceedings could cement claims of genocide against Israel and that it could lead to sanctions against it and diplomatic isolation. Article 3 of the Genocide Convention prohibits and punishes conspiracy to commit genocide, direct and public incitement. If the ICJ rules in favour of South Africa, it could mean states like the UK and the US, who did not stop Israel and instead lent its support by supplying munitions, could face prosecution. Whether Israel itself will face prosecution by the ICJ, only time will tell.